Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Fiber for Breakfast. We're now on our 23rd episode of 2022. Before we kick off, I'd like to thank our sponsors of Fiber for Breakfast, which include our gold sponsors, CHR Solutions, Millennium, and Plume, and our silver sponsor, Graybar. Yesterday, the White House issued a fact sheet announcing over $25 billion in ARPA funding to help ensure every American has access to high-speed, affordable broadband. This $25 billion is in addition to the $65 billion in the IIJA broadband infrastructure funding. The statement highlighted the $10 billion in capital projects funding from Treasury, $8 billion in ARPA state and local funding, and $7 billion in the FCC's Emergency Connectivity Fund. The statement goes on to highlight a $500 million in state awards from the Capital Projects Fund to critical broadband infrastructure projects to connect over 200,000 homes and businesses in Louisiana, New Hampshire, Virginia, and West Virginia. The $8 billion in ARPA funding is funding over 230 state, local, and tribal government projects to expand last mile and middle mile networks. And the Emergency Connectivity Fund is helping over 10,000 schools and libraries close the homework gap and support off-campus learning, helping over 12.6 million students, providing schools and libraries with 10 million connected devices and over 5 million broadband connections. What's really exciting about the White House announcement is that we're just getting started. Our industry has a once-in-a-generation opportunity to close the digital divide once and for all. So speaking of closing the digital divide, Fiber Connect 2022 is now only 4 days away. It's going to be held in Nashville on Sunday, June 12th through Wednesday, June 15th. We anticipate a 50% increase. That's 50% increase over last year's record attendance. We're kicking off Sunday with our pre-conference workshops that will include our wildly popular broadband starter kit. We also have workshops on the future of fiber with our friends at the Broadband Forum, and the Fiber Playbook with the state broadband offices, and Fiber for Cable Operators workshop. Our conference is going to be phenomenal with over 200 speakers and 170 sessions. So if you haven't registered, you're going to have to do so as soon as possible because we're about at capacity. This is going to be the biggest and best broadband event in the world this year. You are not going to want to miss it. That brings us to today's Fiber for Breakfast session. We're going to be focused on how 1 gig became the global broadband standard. But before I formally introduce today's guest, I'd like to introduce Trish Ehlers from our team, who's going to walk us through some housekeeping items.
Thanks, Gary, and good morning to everyone who's joined us today. Before I go over a few logistical items, I'd like to once again thank our Fiber for Breakfast sponsors, gold sponsors, CHR Solutions, Millennium, and Plume, and our silver sponsor, Graybar. Now, if you would all keep in mind that everyone is in listen mode only this morning, to ask a question, you can just type it into the question box located within your control panel on the right side of your screen. We will host a Q&A session with our panelists at the end of today's session. This presentation is being recorded and will be available to members only on FBA's website within 24 hours. You can find the recording in the Events tab under the Fiber for Breakfast drop-down option. At the conclusion of the presentation, you'll be prompted to complete a very brief feedback survey. If you would take a minute to do so, we'd really appreciate it. We do listen to your input. I'll pass it back to Gary now to introduce our panelists and get us started. Gary?
Thanks, Trish. I'm Gary Bolton, the President and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. Last week at Fiber for Breakfast, we met with our old friend, Rick Talbot at ACG Research to discuss his latest research in a session titled The Middle Mile, What You Don't Know Can Hurt You. Today, our guest is one of my favorite people and a Montana resident, Jaimie Lenderman from Omdia. And we're going to discuss her most recent global technology study on wireline broadband offerings and discuss how 1 gig became the new global broadband standard. Jaimie Lenderman is a principal analyst and research manager at Omdia, covering the Broadband Access Intelligence Service. Jaimie provides insight to key audiences and ecosystem players. Reports include quarterly market share trackers, forecasts, next-gen technology analysis, and business strategy and specialized consulting projects. Jaimie's research areas include fiber, copper, cable, and fixed wireless access technology. She's worked in the telecom industry for over 7 years, and prior to joining Ovum, now Omdia, in 2017, Jaimie was a broadband infrastructure and customer premise equipment analyst at IHS Marquee. She previously held roles in the public policy and construction sector. Jaimie's research findings and thought leadership have been published in key findings for prominent regulatory bodies, including the FCC and EU. And she holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Montana State University. You know, my dad grew up in Montana, so Montana kind of has a special place for me. So that's why I always think of Jaimie when I think of Montana. So Jaimie, welcome. And for audience, please type in your questions as we go for the Q&A session at the end. With that, over to you, Jaimie.
Thanks so much, Gary, and thank you for that very kind introduction. Thank you so much for joining today. And today I'd like to discuss how 1 gig became the global broadband standard. And before I get into the how, it'd be great to spend a few minutes talking about the survey that we conducted in order to come to this conclusion. And this is sort of an informal survey that we've done for many years now. And for this iteration, it was completed in early 2022. And what we did is we took a look at wireline operator websites that were consumer facing, and we looked for the highest available residential broadband offering. Now, we made sure that these offerings were commercially available and for the most part mass market, which means $100 or less for the service. And so how we did this on a global scale is we did have to deploy some local language specialty, and then of course the power of technology of Google Translate was very helpful for us. And so next slide, please. And so what the results that we were able to come to in the survey were after we surveyed 760 wireline operators across 178 geographies. And what we found were 60% of wireline service providers offer 1 gig or greater residential broadband. This figure is up from 45% in 2019. And taking a look specifically at North America, we surveyed 160 operators, and we found that 88% offered 1 gig or faster. And this number is up from 78% in 2019. And we believe that, you know, the pandemic played a large role in this, as well as the availability of next-gen solutions. Next slide, please. And so I'd like to take a quick look at 4 drivers that we're seeing contribute to this high rate of offerings for 1 gig. And one is the consumer demand for high quality bandwidth services. If you'll take a look at the figure on the right, we'll see that in 2021, 16 million subscribers took 500 meg and faster. And we expect by 2026, this number will increase to 67 million, or 50% of all subscribers will take 500 meg or faster. And so some of the drivers for this include work and school from home. And in a lot of cases, we're seeing permanent work from home, as well as the rise in online gaming, as well as live streaming is contributing to the take-up rates for faster tiers. And then additionally, the changing demographics around the average broadband subscriber and what they understand to be their service offering. So at the very least, they are aware, but many understand downstream as well as their upstream offering. Next slide, please. And so taking a quick look at another driver, which is operator technology upgrades, there's been a wide breadth of next-gen broadband vendor solutions that have created new opportunities in the fiber space. as well as new vendors have emerged in the PON market space that has created further competition. This has caused a dramatic uptake and expansion of PON networks in North America. For example, PON OLT port shipments in 2019 were 300,000, and in 2021 they increased to 831,000 ports. And we're also seeing a number of operators choosing to go with 10 gig, and that adoption is ramping as well. This is enabling faster broadband speeds, new services, as well as non-residential application opportunity, to which the revenue streams that come about are able to be reinvested into expanding fiber to the home networks. And we expect this growth to continue. We forecast that OLT port shipments will reach 3 million by 2027. And in 2027, 98% of OLT ports shipped will be 10 gig and higher. I should say 10 gig and higher capable. Next slide, please. And so spending a quick moment taking a look at 10 gig at the premise. There are several operators that are installing 10 gig ONT ONUs at the customer premise. The reason for this is the pricing between 10 gig PON and previous generations has declined to less than the cost of a truck roll. And so here an operator can eliminate the cost of a truck roll in the future by deploying 10 gig now, and in turn being able to turn up those next gen bandwidths, broadband speeds a little bit easier for the subscriber. And so on the right, it's just the forecast of where we see 10 gig, 25 gig, and 50 gig PON port shipments going. And you can see by 2027, almost 100% of ONTs and ONUs will be 10 gig or higher capable. Next slide, please. Another driver we're seeing is around service provider marketing strategies as well as subscriber perception. We're seeing 1 gig and faster take-up rates is still nascent, but marketing has truly shaped consumer perception, and that is operators should offer 1 gig even though a subscriber may not take up the service. That perception is due to the risk that if there is a competitive service that offers gigabit that becomes available, there is a risk for sub churn. A sub may and the underlying perception is that if a subscriber perceives a competitor's network as superior, they may choose that service, and even if their plan is not to take the gigabit service. And this is especially true with symmetrical services. And so taking a quick look at the survey or at the table at the right, we found that 72% of service providers surveyed for wireline offerings offered 1 gig, and then 16% offered greater than 1 gig. And this is showing that operators have had to offer 1 gig and higher in order to stay competitive. Next slide, please. And the fourth driver I'd like to touch on is the investment from the public as well as the private sector. So taking a look at government investment, really the driver here is to close the digital divide. And while closing the digital divide is not driving many gigabit offerings at this time, it is making many last miles less cost prohibitive, and therefore gigabit services will be able to be offered at a later time. Taking a look at private investment from public equity as well as investment funds, the driver here is that fiber is seen as an attractive risk return investment. And this is driving many service providers to expand their fiber to the home rollouts as well as service offerings. The next slide, please. And so collectively, these market drivers will continue to evolve. Taking a look at changing consumer demands, while 1 gig may stay the norm, we're seeing the introduction of specialized services within those service offerings. For example, we're seeing low latency packages catered to gamers come about, as well as the additional offerings around an enterprise-like service for broadband consumers. And this is just to help support the permanent work from home folks that are looking for something that is closer to an SLA versus best efforts. And then the market driver around, the market driver around operator network upgrades is that we are seeing the rise of 25 gig PON at this time, as well as the introduction in the next couple years of 50 gig PON. And while these network upgrades may not directly apply to residential offerings, we do see the non-residential opportunity here, and that the revenues can then be reinvested into fiber to the home networks. And then for public and private investment, while government funding may not be around forever, it is definitely available in the short and middle term at this time. And we're definitely going to continue to see that driver to help close the digital divide. And then as well as private investment, we're going to continue to see these partnerships occur. And many of them will have a local emphasis in order to help build out places where there may not be an incumbent. And then lastly, taking a look at marketing strategies. We're already seeing 2 gig, 5 gig, and in some cases 10 gig offerings in North America. But while 1 gig will stay the norm for a while, marketing will continue. And this is ultimately driving new norms such as 2, 5, and 10 gig, which may become ubiquitous in the long term. But at this point, 1 gig is definitely the global broadband standard. And so with that, I just wanted to say thank you. And then as well as next slide, I'd like to do a quick plug for myself at Fiber Connect next week. I will be leading a panel, which is going to be really exciting around fiber and real estate. And then additionally, I'll be doing an analyst take on non-residential opportunity in the access network. So I'm really looking forward to it. And Gary, I'll hand it back to you. And thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thanks, Jaimie. Hey, Trish, can we roll back a few slides? I wanted to kind of keep going back, go back a few more. Right, okay, go forward one. What was the slide that you had? Yeah, so you on the second column, you said that OLT port shipments are going to be 831,000 versus 300,000. So almost a threefold increase in OLT ports. So when you think about that, right, if an OLT port goes to say 32 or 64 or 128 ONTs, is that, so it sounds like, I mean, we're going to be upgrading all those ONTs as well?
So at this time, not every ONT needs to be upgraded, but what we're seeing is if there's rollouts of new ONT ONUs, it's much more cost effective to roll out a 10 gig in order to future-proof that customer.
Yeah, that makes sense. So one of the questions that came in is, do you think people are picking faster tiers due to the extreme limitations in upstream states from cable ISPs? You know, because today, you know, the cable dominates broadband market share. So what do you see there?
I definitely think that's the case. Many subscribers have never had access to a symmetrical service. And I think especially those subscribers that have an understanding of upstream as well as latency are taking up those 1 gig packages. And that's what we're seeing in, as those subscribers that are taking up 1 gig services right now tend to have that type of profile.
So we have a workshop on Sunday for cable operators to help them move to fiber. And we've certainly seen the smaller cable guys have already moved to fiber, and kind of the holdouts are more some of the large ones. Do you see, is fiber synonymous with gigabit services, and are consumers going to be looking for fiber services?
Well, I definitely think that cable technology has evolved in order to support faster throughput on the downstream. And I know that there are many that are going to deploy DOCSIS 4.0 in North America. However, there is always going to be that upstream gap. Until there's able to be symmetrical services offered on fiber, on broadband, they will continue to go, well, sorry, how should I rephrase that? Cable offerings will continue to offer on the more and more throughput on the downstream. However, fiber is the only thing that is offering symmetrical services at this time. And I think that there is going to be real competition there in the brownfield. And I think what we're already seeing, and I think will be prevalent at the session, is that cable operators are using fiber for greenfield and in new builds, because that they see as a future-proof way to handle those types of networks. I think in addition, cable operators are going to continue to sort of push back against fiber with these new technologies. But I think at the end of the day, it's about delivering the best service you can to the end subscriber.
Absolutely. So you put, one of the drivers being gaming. I was reading the Wall Street Journal this morning about virtual bars, and in the metasphere, I can't picture of who would go to a virtual bar, but so these are real things. So you see that kind of these online avatars and gaming and kind of these, is that fringe, or is that really getting to be more mainstream?
It's pretty interesting when we took a look at who is taking up these AR VR services. It's definitely down to just a handful of countries that are taking up these types of services. So we're seeing that in China as well as Japan, but number 3 is the United States. And so it's definitely not a driver in every country, but particularly in the United States, it is a driver. And I do believe that comes down to just the culture in the United States around gaming. And I think the same can be said in China as well as Japan.
Well, one of our keynotes is from Meta, and it's going to be talking about the metasphere. So we'll learn kind of what to expect in the future. So one of the questions came in on, we were talking about OLTs and the split. What are you seeing typical for how many ONTs per OLT? Is it 16, 32, 64, 128?
I think in North America specifically, we're seeing it more on the 1x16, 1x32, and in 1x64. We're not seeing as much 1x128s, but of course I can't speak for every operator in North America, but these are the trends that we're seeing in order to help have that bandwidth available, as well as to be able to have the opportunity for those subscribers that want to subscribe to higher tiers.
So I also got a question in, just kind of amazed that 98% of OLT ports are going to be 10 gig or higher by 2027. That is a pretty phenomenal increase, when we have, politicians and people talking about 100 by 20 and things like that, when we're actually going to have the whole network at 10 gig and beyond. How do you gather your information and forecast OLT shipments, and how does that data come about?
Sure. Well, collectively as a team, we have conversations with the ecosystem, not just vendors, but also the components providers and the chip vendors. As well, we do interviews with various operators to see the use cases as well. And I think that what we're seeing is that the cost differential that we're seeing between 10 gig and previous generations is it really just makes sense to go with a 10 gig and higher capable port. And that is for upgrades and network extensions. It's not necessarily that you have to switch out every port at this time. It's just new ports going forward are going to be majority 10 gig capable.
So if you're building a new network, you should be definitely looking 10 gig and beyond.
Yes, that is what we're seeing right now. As new network builds are happening, the majority of folks are going with XGS-PON.
Okay, and then now that we're at 1 gig, right? I think you said 88% of the operators are offering 1 gig. When is the multi-gig going to be the standard in North America?
Sure, I definitely think 1 gig has some legs to it. I think there's going to be, as I mentioned, some more emphasis around different types of packages. So it's not just 1 gig, but it's low latency 1 gig or enterprise like service where it's guaranteed. Before we're going to see really the ubiquitousness of multi-gig offerings. But I know, as everyone I'm sure on this call knows, that there are already multi-gigabit offerings available. It's just the fact whether they're going to be widespread. And I think we're definitely a few years out from that, but it definitely will happen.
And then, so Sunday we have a workshop on future fiber with Broadband Forum. And they're going to definitely be talking a lot about 25 gig and 50 gig PON. How real are those, and when should we expect people to start moving from 10 gig PONs to 25 gig and 50 gig PON?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question real quick?
Yeah, when do you expect
the audio go out.
When do you expect the adoption of 25 gig and 50 gig PON?
Well, we're already seeing the adoption of 25 gig PON for some operators in different regions, but we definitely see commercial uptake of that happening this year and into the beginning of next year, starting to ramp. The availability of 50 gig PON is still several quarters off, so I think it's going to be a couple years until we're going to continue to see the ramp for that. I think for 50 gig PON, one thing in particular we're seeing is the utilization of it for fiber to the room, as well as the opportunity to use it for mobile transport. We're already seeing at least a couple operators using 25 gig for mobile transport as well.
So fiber to the room, that was a big topic at the Fiber to the Home Europe conference. So tell us about what is fiber to the room.
Sure. So fiber to the room is essentially not just running an ONT ONU to the customer premise, it's also having one in every room. And so enabling, if there's a 10 gig throughput to the home, it's enabling 1 gig to every room. This is where we've seen a huge ramp for this technology in China over the past couple quarters. And we're still, I know there's a number of operators out there still sort of feeling the waters of whether they want to integrate fiber to the room into their business strategy. But I think there's going to be a lot of conversation around it. There's definitely at the couple conferences I've been to this year, a lot of conversation around fiber to the room. So I look forward in our follow-up post Fiber Connect, Fiber for Breakfast, to talk about, if that indeed came true or if I'm just really bad at predicting things.
Well, Jaimie, thank you so much. Really appreciate you sharing your insights and research for the audience. And thanks everyone for joining us. And we look back to get back together next Wednesday. We're going to be discussing the power of fiber. Power utilities build fiber for the greater good with my friends Pete Hofswell from Holland Board of Public Works, Katie Espeth of EPB, and George Segal from Alabama Power. So you're not going to want to miss that. And we'll see you guys all Sunday in Nashville, kick off the biggest and best conference in the world this year. So See you Sunday and next week.
Thank you.